welcome to, I know it says March 18th. I appreciate your patience as I had to reschedule from last Monday to this Monday. I did not have a voice last week, so that would have been a really interesting webinar to not be able to talk. So ignore the fact that it says March 18th. It is in fact March 25th, and I appreciate you rescheduling to be able to be with us today. So today's session is a little bit different than what we normally do. Traditionally, we are doing sessions based off of a function in Schoolnet, whether that's creating an assessment or looking at data reports, or like technology enhanced items. We're usually talking to you about specific functions in Schoolnet. So today is a little bit different based off of feedback that we got from the field last year. This session was requested. So today we're actually going to talk about how you can use Schoolnet as your formative assessment tool and then be able to incorporate it in a station rotation type format. So we're going to still talk about some like functions of Schoolnet, of course, but we're taking a different approach and kind of showing how you can use this to fit into your classroom. So let's get started. First off is just a few introductions. Oh, I love how I have Happy New Year in March. Didn't even catch that. My name is Rebecca Stokes. I'm the product manager for Schoolnet and Canvas for NCDPI. My email address is there on the screen on slide 2. And we are extremely fortunate to have Catherine Simone with us from Pearson. Catherine, are you able to unmute and introduce yourself?
I think I got it this time.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah,
Sorry, I had to
I
go out and
can.
come back in again. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you again. Catherine Simone here. Look forward to working with you today.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. And just a few housekeeping things before we get started. The first one is CEU credits. So you do get 0.1 CEUs, which is equivalent to 1 hour for being in the live webinar with us today. You do have to participate in the live session. So at the end of the session, I get a report of who was in the session along with your email address and how long you were in the session. So as long as you are with us today, which it looks like some of you are clearly with us today, and you are with us for the entirety of our webinar, then I will be able to send you 0.1 CEUs. Now, I cannot determine what type of credit it is. Your district will determine whether it fits into certain categories. So you just want to make sure that you are following your district's procedures for submitting CEU credits, and then they will be able to apply that to the area that they see fit. I will email you, there we go, your CEUs. So I will actually send an email at the end of the week that will have a recording of this webinar, as well as the slide deck and your CEU certificate. So all of that will be emailed to you. So if you, and I just realized that Friday is a holiday, so I will do it on Thursday. So if you have not received an email from me by Thursday, you can always reach out. Things always come up, but usually I'm sending them by the end of the week. So we are using WebEx today, so it will not allow you to unmute. So we do encourage that you use the chat feature. It is located, well, for me, it's beside participants. I'm not sure where it is for you. It should be right here beside participants, but we do encourage you to use the chat. That's where I posted the link for the bit.ly as well, and I will need to stop hitting my mouse. I'm going to re-enter that into the chat for anyone new that might have joined. And I think that's all of our housekeeping. So I'm actually going to cut my camera and we're going to go ahead and get started. All right. So again, thank you so much for being here, not only for rescheduling from last week to this week, but for taking time out of your day to be with Catherine and I. It's a beautiful day full of, I'm sure, thousands of other things you can be doing. So we are greatly, greatly appreciative that you are here with us to talk about Schoolnet as formative assessments in a station rotation format. All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to define formative assessment and then talk about how to use Schoolnet as a formative assessment. And then we're going to define and discuss station rotation in the classroom. So I'm really hoping to get some feedback from all of you about station rotation. So please use the chat and interact with us. And we're going to talk about how you can use Schoolnet in those stations. And then we'll talk about the data that you get from formatives. So again, we're going to be talking about specific functions and things in Schoolnet, but we're going to be talking about them in the lens of formative assessment and station rotation. All right, so first thing on our agenda was to talk about what is formative assessment. So as classroom teachers, we always hear about formative assessment and summative assessment. And we know that formatives are supposed to be, smaller in nature that kind of give us feedback up until we are ready for the summative. But we really want to focus intentionally on what exactly the tool is supposed to be used for, not Schoolnet, but formative assessments. So it's a planned, ongoing process used by all students and teachers during learning and teaching to elicit and use evidence of student learning to improve student understanding of the intended learning outcomes and support students to become self-directed learners. And that's a quote that I actually got from this link right here, which is revising the definition of formative assessment. I've got that linked there for you. But I really wanted to kind of look at this picture right here. So we want formative assessments to not only be a guided practice, but they allow us as teachers to be able to adjust our instruction. I know that it says on the fly, but usually it would be, the next day if we're actually giving the formative assessment at the end of the class. But it gives us an opportunity to check for understanding. Do students understand what we talked about in class today based off of our standards? And then it helps guide our future instruction. So a great way is kind of this sticky note right here. It provides a snapshot of the learning while it's still happening, meaning we are not by any means thinking that students are ready for the summative or the unit test or whatever it is that you are referring to. We want to see if they are understanding the bits and pieces that are leading up to that summative. So it gives us a snapshot. So then if our students are not understanding, then we're able to kind of kick back and punt, go back to our standards, go back to our resources, see what we might need to do to adjust the student learning, do some remediation, some intervention, some enrichment, whatever it might be to fit the needs of the student while they are continuing to progress through those standards. Okay, so using that as our lens, let's talk about how you can use Schoolnet as a formative assessment. Because of course, you can do tons of different formative assessments, whether that's like an exit slip of paper that they're just strictly, writing answers to a few questions that you might have projected for them. Or you could do some of the gamified tools like I'm trying to think like Booklet or quizzes or anything like that. It could be little voting devices that you might have in the classroom. It could be just dry erase boards that the students have and they're holding up. You can have formative assessments look however you want in lots of varied ways. But if we are focusing on just Schoolnet as one of your methods, Catherine and I are by no means saying that Schoolnet should be your only method of formative assessment. That is not what we're saying. Just that it can be used as one of your tools for formative assessment. So some things to remember if you're using Schoolnet for your formative assessments is that you want to have it be a snapshot of current learning. So you don't want your formative assessment to include 25 different standards. That would be something more for summative, or really that would be something for, the end of the semester with that many standards. But you want it to be a snapshot. So it might be one or two standards, just maybe what you were covering in class that day. But you want to keep it short and meaningful with those standards and the questions themselves. So you can create the assessment with the goal of viewing the standard data to be able to restructure your teaching. Of course, you can choose however many questions you want, but it is recommended that you keep formatives between 5 and 10 questions. They could be smaller in length. They can, of course, be longer in length if you choose, but just the ideal formative assessment would be about 5 to 10 questions. And if at any time you have any questions or you want to add any feedback of what formative assessments mean to you or your classroom, please feel free to put those in the chat. We want to interact with you all. And so we would love to hear what you're doing in the classroom, what works for you, or just any questions that you have. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about, we did put in here the directions about how to actually build a Schoolnet assessment, which is something that we would have covered in some of our beginning sessions. But just in case this was your first webinar with us, I did want to include the directions in here, but we're not going to actually spend a lot of time on the how to create assessment. I'm going to go through it and create a sample one, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the details of the creation part because that would have been something that we talked about in other sessions. So if you have questions about that, please reach out, let us know. You can put a question in the chat. But I'm going to actually stop sharing this window and share the other one. So stop there. Make sure it'll let me. There we go. Okay, so Catherine, let me know if I am not sharing my Schoolnet screen for me.
Nope, looks good. You're all set.
Okay, perfect. And I am not going to be able to see the chat, so if there's any
I have it up
in there,
Yep.
just pause me.
Yep.
Okay, so I am in my Schoolnet platform. So we're going to come over to assessments. And there's two different ways that you can do this. You can either find questions and build an assessment after your questions, or you can create an assessment and then choose your questions. Either way. So the directions that we have gone over previously, we're actually finding questions first. So that's what I'll do. And remember, we're going to go through this with the lens of a formative assessment. So I'm going to want to keep this to between 5 and 10 questions, and then a specific standard, whether that's 1 or 2 standards that I might have covered in class that day. And of course, I'm going to go be a little slow. There we go. Okay. So one thing that I did want to pause, and we're actually going to talk about this in just a little bit, but the item banks that we're choosing. And yeah, okay, because I'm in the training site, so I want to make sure they're here. When you are using other websites or resources that might have questions already built or tests already built, and you are just typing in your standard and selecting those things. While those are very easy to use and they might be quick because they're already created, they're not written in the same format as your end of grade or end of course assessments. So that is one of the big gains of Schoolnet, is that the questions are written by the same people that are writing your end of grade and end of course assessments. So if you're giving formative assessments to kind of give you a snapshot of the student learning, then you might want to consider using this platform as your formative assessment tool because the questions are written in the same format by the same people. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to talk about is the NCDPI Classroom Bank. So that's where I'm going to actually pull questions from. Another one that we have is the Key Data Systems Bank. This is a bank that we purchase, that the state purchases for teachers to use. And those are by the company Renaissance. So the same company that does like Star Math and Star Reader, things like that. But if you want the questions that are written by the same people as your end of grade assessments, then you're going to want to click on this NCDPI Classroom Bank right here. So for my formative, I'm going to click on that item bank. And then I'm going to need to change my filter. Since I'm in the training site, these subjects are already selected. They would not already be selected in your instance. So let me just get rid of these real quick. Again, you would not have to do this. I'm going to go with math because I taught math, so that's just what I'm familiar with. So I'm going to go to math, and I'm going to do, I taught 5th grade, so I'm going to keep it at 5th grade. Okay. Now, the other part about our formative assessments is we want to be intentional with our standards. So we don't want to just, choose from these 2,642 items, I want to specifically look at the ones that are addressing the standards that we covered in class. Okay, so I'm going to click on my standards, and it was math. Okay, so trying to think, it really doesn't matter for this particular example, but I know towards the end of the year, we were always working on fractions. So I'm going to, instead of clicking this plus sign, because that's going to add all 570 questions for this 5NF standard, I'm going to want to click this down arrow and actually drill down into the specific standards that we would have covered in class. So I'm going to keep clicking these arrows just to show you that it does drill down even into the parts where it might say like A, B, C, okay? So for this example, I'm going to say that we talked about, excuse me, about NF3 in class today, where we were using fractions to model and solve division problems. So I'm going to click this plus sign. Now I have 104 questions to choose from. This does not have to be the only day I'm doing a formative assessment, so I can always choose a few for tomorrow if I cover this in class today, and then use some of the other ones in a different formative assessment, or even use those on a summative that I create for the students later on in the unit. But I can go through and choose my questions. So I'm going to select 5 questions for my formative. And it's going to tell me right down here how many items I've selected. So there's my 5. And I'm going to add this to a test. And I'm going to create a new test. If I already had a test created, then I could select to add these questions to it, but I do not. So I'm going to create a new test. Okay, and I would want this to be 5NF3 formative 1. Go through and just choose my math, my grade level, and my standards document. All of the rest of this, I'm going to keep the same just because we are not getting into the details of creating the assessment. But one thing I do want to remember to do is in my test settings, I do want to make sure that I turn on my accommodations for any of my students that might have that. Right, so that's another benefit of using Schoolnet as your formative assessment. Your students are still able to get their accommodations that they have in their 504 IEP, as long as they are turned on in the platform and you turn it on for the assessment. So I want them to have those accommodations, so I want to make sure that I turn that on. So I'm going to click Generate Test. Make sure that I selected everything. I did. Okay, so it's thinking. There we go. Okay. So now from here, I would be able to kind of go through and preview these again, but I'm going to actually return to the test details. And I am ready to finalize and schedule this test for my students. Okay. So I'm going to click Finalize and Schedule. Okay. So I do have to pick the dates of when I want my students to be able to start this. Now, in step 2 right here, the assignments for your students, and we're going to get into the details of this when we're talking about station rotation. But if I'm doing this as a formative assessment, I would want all of my students to be able to take this assessment so I can get the snapshot of how they're doing on this particular standard. So for this formative, I would want to select my math class so that every student in my math class is taking it. But after I have given this formative, if I then see that I have some students who missed all of the questions on this particular standard, I go through and I have my intervention, my remediation with the students. If I then want to kind of reassess the standard as a teacher, because leadership does not have this, as a teacher, you can go in and actually assign your assessments to individual students. If you don't want the entire class to take it because they had already mastered that standard, you can create an assessment for just a certain group of students, okay? Let's see here. All that would remain the same, and I can save and publish. And now I have built a 5-question formative assessment. It did not take me but a few minutes. Now, of course, I did not read the questions in detail as you would want to do that, but it was only 5 questions, so it wouldn't take too much longer. But I'm having specific standards that are matched to what I would have covered in class. They are quality questions that are written by the same people that are giving my students the assessment at the end of the year. So I can trust the content and that the results that I'm getting from their formatives are, in fact, true predictors of how the students would do on this particular standard. Okay, so let me stop sharing here and go back here. And Catherine, while I'm
We have a
resharing, do you have any
question.
questions?
Yep, we do. We just got one.
Okay.
If I create a district CFA
Mhm.
and push it out to schools, are teachers able to choose individual students? So I'm guessing that you're recommending it to teachers, Rachel. How are you pushing it out? Are you actually scheduling it or recommending it? She would recommend it. Okay. Then when the teachers pick it up, yes, they are able to make the assignment if you recommend it to the teachers.
Mhm. So teachers can do that with their My Classroom assessments, and then the ones that are recommended, like Catherine just said, whether it's a school assessment or district assessment, they would be able to do that as well. But if it is assigned to them, then you at the district are assigning it to courses, and you do not have the option of assigning it to individual students. Great question. Okay. I'm so sorry. I just coughed in your ears. Okay. So let me scoot through here because this is what we were just talking about. And again, these are just instructions for if you have not really ever created a Schoolnet assessment before. Let me, okay. This is where I needed to be. Okay. So we talked about while you can use a variety of different methods, and we are, of course, not saying don't use other methods. That is by no means what we're saying at all. Please use what works best for your students and for you as the teacher, or anything that your district recommends or tells you to do for formative assessments. But you're not going to always have those quality content or detailed data analysis of your formative, which is a positive thing with Schoolnet. So you have those questions that you know are quality and that are matched to our state standards. Because I know as a previous teacher, sometimes when I would search for questions, they might say that they're aligned to our standards, but they weren't actually aligned to our standards. So they could have been tagged with it, but you want to make sure that you are, in fact, reading the question, that it is, in fact, matched to our standard. Okay. So now let's kind of switch our lens. We know how to create a formative assessment, but now let's talk about how you can use formative assessments in a station rotation in the classroom. And again, this was something that was specifically requested. So I know a lot of you probably are already fully aware of station rotation, and it might be something that you're already incorporating into your classroom. So always good to kind of reevaluate and reinvestigate what this actually is. So I do have a quote here from Avid Open Access, and I do have it linked with this image right here. But there was a quote in this article that said that station rotation is where students are going to rotate in small groups throughout a series of learning stations. So for instance, you might design one station to be independent or online learning, where students work with content in a self-paced software program, such as Schoolnet, or a learning management system such as Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom, whatever it is that your specific school or district may use. And it's just a little graphic here. Whoops, did not mean to click on that, but at least, yes, here you can see where I pulled that article and image from. Did not actually mean to click on it, but that is a resource there for you. But you always have that teacher station, and that's where you're providing the students with that remediation or that enrichment, or it might just be review, whatever it is that you wanted to work on with those students in a small group. And then you could have a station that is specifically for students to be able to do independent work, and that could be where you are using your Schoolnet formative. You could post the code for the assessment in your LMS, or it could be that if you are a Canvas district, you are linking the Schoolnet assessment into the LMS directly. But it's just a way to be able to use Schoolnet without it having to be all at once, whole group, everyone is testing on this particular formative assessment. It could be throughout the time that you have the students in class. Okay, so why use station rotation in the classroom? So it gives you the ability to create small learning communities within a larger class, especially those of you that are upper grades. Um, I know from my previous experience, there was some years that I had 35 students in my fifth grade class. And so if that is a number that you are used to seeing, or even higher than that, then you know how difficult it can be sometimes to have that many students. So it's a way to be able to create lots of different activities that are happening, excuse me, simultaneously within your large class, where you still are able to have that kind of individualized instruction with the students that are at your teacher-led station, and the others are still working on assignments throughout the class. So teachers have the time and space to facilitate those differentiated small groups, engage learners in interactive lessons, or facilitate small group discussions, and be able to provide that real-time feedback on work in progress. Students can be grouped flexibly, so you could use mixed skill levels, strengths in group dynamics, interest-based. You can use the data reports that are in Schoolnet to be able to group your students based off of how they perform on the formative assessment. So you can kind of make those groups however you see fit. But offline and online stations can be used to encourage communication and collaboration among students for the purpose of building community and offering peer support depending on the project. And since the whole class is not moving in lockstep through a single experience, meaning whole class instruction, the teachers can prioritize student agency by building those meaningful choices for students, whether it was in like a choice board, or I mean, that's what we called them, was choice boards, where students got to choose their different activities. And I just might have certain activities that they were required to do, which might be a formative assessment. And then they got to choose the other activities that would still demonstrate their learning, but they got to choose the format in which they did that. And as students navigate tasks in a small group dynamic, they have more opportunities to control the pace of their learning. And all of this came from Caitlin Tucker. If you have not heard of Caitlin Tucker before, she is amazing. Our district had done a lot of professional development through her. So she had this specific part about station rotation model, but she's had several books as well. I definitely encourage you to kind of research Dr. Caitlin Tucker. She's really great. But I have that linked there for you. Okay, so how would we use Schoolnet in a station rotation? So of course you can use the Schoolnet data that you get from your formative or summative, depending on how you're using it, to be able to create your student groups in a station rotation. But you also can use Schoolnet itself as a station within the classroom. So with all of the things that we have just talked about in mind, you can create a small formative assessment for the entire class to take within their rotation time. You can also provide those accommodations for students that I showed you in the settings, but you can also create multiple versions of the formative assessment and assign to specific groups of students based on their learning. So let me stop. I don't know why I have to tell you that I'm going to stop sharing and reshare every time. I just do. So I apologize.
No questions at this time. Unless anyone has any questions, we'll be happy to take them right now.
Knowing me, I probably canceled it out. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to actually copy this assessment. So we said that you could create multiple versions. So this is my one that I gave to the entire class. But I could also, let me copy this. Let me take out this. And I might would put group one. I'm going to generate that test. Going to think about it for a second. So now when I go through to schedule, choose my dates, then I could come here where it says assignment for your students. I could select assignment, select assignment. There we go. And I can assign to individual students. Okay, so then this is my class of, fake students. But if I knew that student A, B, C, D, and E were all in a group together, or I had grouped them, I can choose from just an individual section as well. Then I could just assign those students this assessment. So then I could make a copy and change questions around, or reduce the number of questions, or add the number of questions, or um, pull questions from the same standard but maybe in a higher grade level. Whatever it was that I wanted to do, I could create that assessment and just assign it to these specific students. Okay. All right. I have to make it full window every time. Okay. I should be back on my station rotation screen. Okay. There we go. All right, so before we talk about what data is provided and how you can use it, does anyone want to, of course, we cannot force you, but would anyone like to put in the chat how you are currently using station rotation, or if you are using station rotation in your classroom, or how you are using formative assessments in the classroom? We would love to collaborate with you, hear what you're doing, have others be able to kind of collaborate and see what you're doing and kind of offer their comments as well. But while I'm pulling up the training site, if anybody would like to put in the chat what you're currently doing for formative assessments or station rotation. And if you're not, if you feel like what we've shown you so far would kind of help you start either of those things in your classroom, we'd love to hear from you. So I'm going to be quiet for just a minute, and hopefully you guys will put some things in the chat.
So we have one, Rebecca. I'm using formative assessments to help group my students by their ability levels.
Awesome.
And that's
Thank you
from
for great. Thank you for sharing that, Angela. I appreciate you putting that in the chat for us, participating with us. All right. So speaking of, excuse me, again, I'm so sorry, just coughed in your ear. Kind of thinking of how Angela is saying that she's using it. Let's focus on that. But am I sharing my screen, Catherine? I don't even know.
Not yet, but we also
Okay.
have one more comment I'll read
Oh,
while you are working on sharing your screen. This
awesome.
is from Renee. She takes questions from Schoolnet and puts them on the whiteboards around the room so students can walk around with a partner and solve each problem. I usually require students to find 8 problems they can solve. Oh, great idea, like a gallery walk.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you for sharing that.
And now we can see your screen.
Oh, even better. So, kind of focusing on what I think you said it was Angela said that she uses formative assessments to kind of
Correct.
group her students. Okay. So kind of thinking on that lens, let's talk about the data that is provided from Schoolnet, and how you could then use that for your groups. Because the whole point of a formative assessment is to give us the data on a student to know, are they comprehending what we are talking about in class, right? That's our snapshot. Are the students understanding and or retaining the information? Okay. So if you are giving a formative assessment that is not really giving you that data, then you might want to consider a different method of formative assessments because that's the point of them. You want to be able to know how students are learning and if they are understanding, okay? So if we are talking about Schoolnet as your formative assessment, I'm going to go to my reporting dashboard. And now I am not going to be able to pull data on my formative that I just made because I'm in the training site and nobody has taken that. So I'm going to have to use a different one, but it'll still give us the same data. I am going to go for math since that's what my formative was on. So, and now I just need to see if I have a fake assessment that might cover multiple standards. Okay, this EOG mixed review here. Now, of course, this would not have been a formative because more than likely this would have been several questions. But if I click on that assessment, and again, I am not focusing on all of the data reports here because that's something that we would have covered in another session. But I am going to focus on some specific reports that you get from Schoolnet. And one of those is standards analysis right here. So after I've given this formative assessment, and whether it's on one standard, two standards, or if I had three standards, however many standards you decide to have on your formative assessment, this standards analysis is going to not only list the standards here for you, but another plus is if you kind of hover over it, it'll actually show you the entire standard, which is really nice, especially if your standards have changed or you might be new to the classroom. You don't have those standards memorized just yet. So if you kind of hover over it, it will show you the full standard, which is nice. But this is going to show you how the class did as a whole on those particular standards. But if you scroll down, you're able to see the students individually and how they scored. Okay, so this is on Math Practice 2. If I were to sort here, then it's going to show me that this student got both of the questions that were on this particular math practice incorrect. Okay, whereas I can see all of these students got it correct. This one got both of them wrong, and both of these students only got one of them correct. Okay, so I could put these three students in a group if I wanted for this particular math practice, or I could focus on maybe one of these standards over here. If I sort this one, then I can see the students that have mastered this standard and the ones that need additional support. This one is kind of one of those like bubble kids, we would say, where they were almost there, almost at proficiency. Whereas these three here, I do not feel like they have a clear understanding of this particular standard. So I would want to group these students together. So you can sort all of these different categories here or standard, excuse me. And the number beside the standard is actually telling you how many questions you had from that particular standard on the assessment. Okay. So that is one particular report that you could use for your grouping with your formative assessment. Another one, scroll back up, is the item analysis report, where it's going to actually break it down by question. So it's still going to show you the standard, of course, but it's going to break it down for the question. So then if you had a large number of students missing a question, you're able to view that question and see, was it written in the type of format where it says like everything except, or all but which one? Like it could be the wording of it too that you might need to kind of go over with your students and not necessarily the standard. They might understand the standard, but they misunderstood the question and what it was asking. So that's where item analysis is going to come in because it's going to give all of the items that were on your assessment here and it'll show you the standard. But if you scroll down, it'll actually show you how the students performed on that particular question. So if I am looking at, let's see, let me see if I can find one that had a lower percentage of accuracy. All of these fake students did pretty good. Oh, here's one right here. So item 18, my class had a 6.7% accuracy on this question. So if I scroll down, I can see I've got students choosing A, a lot of A's. It looks like a few D's, but it looks like A was the most common error. So if I actually click right here where it says item 18, it's gonna think for a second, and it's gonna actually show me the question for me to be able to kind of understand myself as the teacher what might have happened, whether it was clearly not understanding the standard or if it was the question. So this one was asking what fraction shows the location of point X, and I can see that the correct answer should have been 11/4, but most of my students chose 17/8. Okay, so then that's going to help me understand, okay, so did they not simplify the fraction? Did they not count these lines correctly? Do they not understand this type of question at all? It's kind of going to go through and just help me analyze whether it's the standard they don't understand or if it's the question itself. Let me go and see. Excuse me. Um, okay, so this would have been another one where it might be that the students don't understand the question. So which picture shows 3/4? My most common answer or most common error, excuse me, was B. So then I would know for those students in particular, they were counting the white squares instead of the shaded squares. Okay, so it's not that they don't understand what 3/4 looks like necessarily. It might be that they were using the wrong color because it doesn't, they might not know what shaded means, something like that. So it just kind of helps us really determine where the error is coming from. And that is the item analysis. Let me go
Rebecca,
back.
um,
Yes.
it's 412. I just want to start with that. And then I was thinking that you could go maybe to Renee's comment on this test and just show everyone how you could capture the individual questions. We could either do it by in the screen in the TestNav browser, or you could actually print the test from Schoolnet, and then that would allow for that the students to walk around the room, preview problems. That's just one option, just to make sure everyone knows the ability to print. That's all.
Ah, of course. And I think you're telling me that I need to speed it up.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
no,
Yes.
that's what,
That
yes. But luckily, I just had one other report to show, and that is the standards mastery. And this is a really good report because not only is it kind of showing our standards and grouping students, but it's actually creating those groups for us. So again, on this particular assessment, if I was looking at, let's see, I'm going to go with NF2. Okay, so I've got my standard listed here, but you'll see these numbers underneath the score groups here. Okay, that's telling me how many students scored in that particular range. So my students that were 20 to 39% for interpreting fractions, which I know is a large part of my end of grade assessment. If I click where it says 7, it's actually going to give me those students' names, and it's making my student groups based off of that particular standard. So if your formative was just on one or two standards like you want it to be, then you would already have your intervention, your remediation, your kind of bubble students, your enrichment. It's going to create that for you. So definitely wanted to show you that. And that is the standards mastery data report. Okay, so talked about that. Okay, so we'll talk about that in just a second. So Catherine, you said to show them how they can print those out, correct?
right. If you just go to the test details for that particular test, we can
Oh,
probably.
well,
Oh, that's okay.
I
No
just got out
worries.
of it. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to choose a random one. So let's see, timeout looks like this one. So when I am on the test details page of the assessment, which is the same page that I would go to schedule the assessment or copy it, if you scroll down, you're going to see 4 tabs: item summary, item details, test settings, and then downloads and resources. If I click downloads and resources, then I am going to get some PDF versions here of the test. So I've got the student test booklet where I could click the PDF. It's going to download for me, and it's going to let me know when it's ready. There we go. And now I have a printout of the assessment, which was only one question. Sorry, I picked a really bad sample, but I now have a paper copy, and I could cut this out and paste it around the room.
Can you go back to the test details and I'll just show you one more option there? If
Of
you
course.
click preview test as a student
Mm-hmm.
and it pops up in test nav, you have the ability, if you wanted to screenshot it, screenshot it, or print screen. That way it's larger and more, it just presents differently for the students. So if you did have that 4 or 5 question assessment, then you could screenshot each of these individually. Sometimes when a test has more than one question on it, they tend to bunch together when you go to print them, unless you choose the Word doc view, and then you can edit it yourself. So just a couple of options there.
Awesome. Now, one thing that I do need to clarify with printing it out or taking screenshots, because of copyright, you want to make sure that you are not screenshotting and then putting it into another platform. So those copyrights are on the front page of Schoolnet. You can, of course, print them and do these gallery walks like another user was saying. I know one user has printed the questions out and put them in Easter eggs for an Easter egg hunt for their class. You can print them out and use the paper copy versions that way. You just cannot upload the questions into another platform. So just keep that in mind. Wanted to clarify that. Okay, so just a few other things, and then we are going to be finished on time, surprisingly. Share the screen. Okay, so with the data reports that we just talked about, you're able to break down and know what standards students have mastered, and which ones need continued support or reteaching. And the benefit of the formative assessment is knowing that you can use that data, and you can then alter your lesson instruction following to know what standard support students still need. So you're able to group the students in the station rotation model that we talked about, and you're able to know what standards are ready for summative evaluation and which ones need continued support throughout the year. So just some benefits of having those detailed data reports that Schoolnet offers. So one other thing is there are some pre-made formative assessments in Schoolnet for you. So teachers can access these recommended assessments from your assessment dashboard. You would just use the filters to select your state benchmark and then your subject and grade. So if you click on your assessment dashboard, you can change this to state benchmark, choose your subject. They go from 3rd grade to 8th grade, correct, Catherine? 3rd through 8th grade, I believe.
Oh, yes, they do.
Okay. And it's gonna, you're good. And it's gonna say KDS, and it'll say like Form C, Form B, Form A, because there are 3 forms for each grade level in the subjects of ELA and math. So there are some already made formatives for you that you are welcome to use. Of course, you can use the platform to create your own as well. But just wanted you to be aware that there are some that are already created for you. But that is all that I have, because the next slides are talking about some Schoolnet resources, monthly webinars, our YouTube channel, a Canvas course that we have. And our next session is going to be in April, and it's actually a repeat session. So we're going to be talking about technology enhanced items in Schoolnet, which we covered in December. But we know that people are coming into the districts even after Christmas. So it might be something that is new to you. So we, of course, invite you to our April 15th session on technology enhanced items in Schoolnet. And that is all that I have for you today. But Catherine and I will hang around for any questions that you may have. But we appreciate you joining us. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close this out for today. Catherine, thank you as always.
Thank you.
And I'm sure I will talk to you soon.
Sounds good. See you.
Have a great day, everyone.